All right, so let's talk about the Dutch waterfall. So, people who monitor their networks have noticed a lot of scan traffic coming out of the Netherlands. This is for Lightscope. This is part of my research. You can visit the website and see all this yourself. What you're looking at here is what the scan coming out of the Netherlands looks like. So, this is destination IP address on that axis. You have time on that axis, and then you have destination, you have your ports on this axis. So what's interesting here is you're looking at a single IP that's scanning all of these ports simultaneously across all of these different machines, right? So they were interested in these ports, then there's a small gap, then they were interested in another small range, and then this is where the waterfall part comes in. They sort of scanned a whole bunch of ports here and then settled on lower ones. This is a sharded scan, so the interesting part is you can see how the pieces of the scan fit together with no overlap. So these pieces are from the different IP addresses that were used in the same scan. So this is part of temporal analysis, and we can sort of fingerprint, and again, you can see how all of those fit together. And then let me rotate it again, you can see what it looks like. So this is for like de-sharding, right? Like identifying tools and actors that are scanning networks using, non-traditional means. So why is this interesting? Okay, so let's say census. Everybody's been scanned by census. This is what a census scan looks like. As soon as I start to click on it, you'll see. So census, this is coming from one IP address. You can see it's this kind of uniform distribution. They hit a bunch of ports kind of randomly. This is 122 different IPs that they've utilized for this scan, like to shard it. And I can start adding all these different IPs in, and you can see how they scan your space, right? And then essentially they'll scan everything very nicely here. But you don't notice any of these really interesting pieces like we saw in Waterfall, for instance. No one IP is doing sort of this interesting thing with all the interlocking. So Census does interlock as well. There's very little overlap between all the different IPs that are being used to scan. But the waterfall, so the Dutch waterfall, has none. Here's another example of a sharded scan that we can use Lightscope to sort of de-shard. So the interesting thing you're looking at here, I call this one layer cake. So you have a certain IP that's responsible just basically for one port range, okay? And again, these are a whole bunch of different endpoints that we're monitoring on this axis. This is time, and these are ports. So this particular IP, this 194.207, was only scanning this port range. But different IPs that were part of it, you can see kind of, and again, this is why I call it layer cake. Each one was responsible for some subset of ports. And again, this is across a whole bunch of different IP addresses, sensors we had. And then you can see how you sort of are putting all these together, and then you can see how the scan fits together. Again, very little overlap here, so the temporal analysis will help attribute all the different IPs that were working together to conduct this scan. Another one that's interesting, so I call this one Not Quite Waterfall. This is another Dutch scan, which these are just so interesting the way they do these. And I forget this piece, I think it's the 49 here. So you can see it's kind of the same thing that they were doing. They had an IP that was scanning like a single port, and then it stopped. And then all of a sudden it started scanning like a whole bunch of different ports in that range before settling back down to a single IP. And again, this was sharded, so there were different IPs working together, and you can see how all of these pieces fit together. And this is such a unique scan that once we have a temporal fingerprint for it, even if they're changing IP addresses or anything else like that, we're going to be able to identify someone who is using this. So obviously this isn't your standard Nmap, Zmap type of thing. So speaking of temporal fingerprinting, Expanse. Now this is a very interesting one. They scan everybody, so you've all probably seen this. The thing you'll notice, and it showed it here for just 1 second. Okay, so Expanse has these sort of gaps, and that's the thing that's very interesting about them. So don't look at these gaps because these are the endpoints, but right here you'll start to see all of these IP addresses start and stop scanning at the same time, and so you get these sort of gaps. So this is one of the ways that we can use temporal fingerprinting to de-shard all of the scan traffic and figure out sort of who's working together. Let me give you a really cool example of what that looks like. So I have to go 2D to show you this, but I will show you how without any complicated math, anything fancy like that, you'll be able to identify over 1,400 different IPs from all these different subnets that are actually the same actor. So if you were looking through your logs, you would see a whole bunch of different IPs. You may not know they're working together, but if you use this temporal analysis that I'm developing, you'd be able to tell. So this is basically census, or I'm sorry, not census, this is expand in 2 dimensions. So you can see here, this is for a single endpoint, so just imagine it's like one of those slices, and from this subnet, you can see the scan activity they're doing. So this is ports and this is time. So again, you sort of see these gaps, and you'll notice these gaps are present in multiple IPs. So here's one subnet that had 253 IPs, here's another one with 245, here's another one with 244, and you see that these gaps line up perfectly, which means that we can fingerprint this scan even though these are completely different subnets, right? This is a 35 dot, this is a 162, here's a 147. So utilizing this temporal fingerprinting method, you can identify and basically de-shard these scans. It's also very interesting because look, this top one, you can see the density here is huge, right? They're hitting like a whole bunch of different IP, a whole bunch of different ports. But then down here at the bottom, you can see this is a far less dense scan, right? Like it's nowhere near the amount of traffic that that other subnet is sending, but because of these gaps, we can still attribute it. So where some of our prior methods would fail, this temporal analysis, and this particular one I kind of call gap analysis, would succeed. So again, this is Lightscope. This is some of my research. I was talking about temporal analysis to sort of de-shard these scans. We've looked at some of the scans that were coming out of the Netherlands and how interesting they are, how all these sort of pieces fit together. And this is Lightscope. If you're interested, come check it out. It's at lightscope.isi.edu.